Hello, Megan Thompson here with Megan Thompson Coaching, and today we're going to talk all about whether or not your child or teen who is highly sensitive really needs their tablet or screen, whatever it is that they're using, iPad, phone, whatever, right? And I'm speaking directly about when your child feels like they need their screen to calm down, or if you're trying to help your child or teen use their screen to develop coping skills. So, when you're parenting a sensitive child or teen who's dealing with daily meltdowns or shutdowns, they're breaking down on a daily basis, maybe even multiple times a day, hitting, kicking, screaming, running away to their room, slamming their doors, at worst saying that they wish that they weren't alive or that life would be better off without you. You can be in quite a pickle trying to help your child or teen develop skills to reduce that behavior, right? And to eliminate it. So who am I, right? Why are we qualified to talk about this? We work with parents around the globe at this point, and I've been doing this for 10 years, supporting parents of sensitive children and teens, eliminating those daily meltdown cycles. And we help parents do that in as little as 8 weeks. And so when we break out of this pattern, one of the things that we see from time to time is highly sensitive kids who have demonstrated some quite significant addictive behaviors to their screens. And I want to talk about this in the sense of understanding where the boundaries lie and where you can acknowledge part of the problem and support you in advocating for your child's development in a way that helps them get their needs met, right? Because the part of the need that you might be trying to support your child in is breaking out of that big emotional overwhelm in that moment. If your child is losing their mind, sometimes you need a break from that, and it can feel quick and easy to hand them the screens too. And so there's no judgment here on how or why you might be in a pickle where your teen or child is saying that they need their screen to chill out. And it's also true that it's not working, right? It's contributing to the problem. So let's talk about why. Let's learn a little bit more about why you're stuck and what's going on, okay? So it's really, really important that you first and foremost decide that screen time is not a coping skill. So I want to speak about this because a lot of parents can fall into the myth or the trap that when your child is in front of the screen, they've got their iPad out, they're just playing a game or maybe reading or watching YouTube, right, is more relevant than reading on the iPad for the topic of today's discussion, whether or not it's a coping skill. And your child is calm, right? You might think that your child is calm. Calm is an emotional state. So let's make sure that we name that. Calm is an emotional state, not a physical display. And so I want to get pretty clear on this, that when your child is using a screen, they are not engaging in coping skills. Screen time is not a coping skill. So I want to talk about this. I have a definitive decision on that for many reasons, especially given my experience coaching and being a child therapist for over a decade and teaching countless families at this point, as well as supervising therapists for many, many years as well on my team and in prior positions before I opened my own practice. And when we think about the need that people might have to use their screen when they're emotionally overwhelmed, right? If your child is having a meltdown, they are emotionally out of control. And they can have an extreme desire to use a screen, but it's very, very important to note that that is not a coping skill, that is a distraction. Now, distracting from an emotion could very well be a skill in that moment, in the sense of trying to keep the lid on a boiling pot, right? But it's really, really important to understand what kind of a skill that is, and that is a skill that puts your brain on pause. So it's really important because you might have a child or teen who is arguing for use of their screens. I chill out. This helps me, right? So let's make sure that that you have the information you need in order to trust your gut. So I'm going to break down what's really going on. When your child is in front of a screen and they are emotionally overwhelmed, they're using a screen to distract themselves, their emotions get put on pause. Now that's really, really important, because when we think about the difference between a body's physical state, right, like rested, seated, like, if you're watching this on video, I'm leaning back, chair, maybe my feet are up if I've got my screen on and I'm watching a TV show, or just scrolling through social media, right? And my body physically could be in a seemingly rested state, in the sense that I'm reclined, right? I'm either seated or feet up, laying down, right? But that does not mean that inside my body I am actually calm, both through my body sensations, because whatever's on the screen is creating an emotional state. And then on top of that, the emotions that I'm experiencing from the prior event that I was frustrated about or aggravated about, right? And I'm using myself as an example, but I'm speaking about this for your child. Say, for example, their sibling grabbed a toy and it's time to head to the car, and you got to go, and you're tempted to grab the iPad before you hop in the car, because you guys are on your way to grandma's house, right? And so you just broke up a sibling argument, and you need your child to chill out enough to get into the car, and then also to quite frankly feel like you can interact with your family, and you can relax with your family, and they can relax with their family, right? And so it can be quite tempting, but also one might assume that because your child's rested and relaxed from a body standpoint, from what you see in what on the outside, that you can jump to the conclusion that your child is calming down when they're using their skill. So then their distraction skill. Then it can be really difficult to justify with your kid or your teen when they're trying to say, I am chill. Look at me. I'm relaxed. I feel better, right? Let's take a look at that. Let's look at the research and science related to neuroscience, brain science, around what's actually going on in your brain, in your child's brain, when they're using a screen. So the screen will activate the mirror neurons. When you're watching something on a show and you feel emotionally connected to that show, or a football game, for example, right? Then you're going to experience an emotion. You might get excited about what's happening. You might feel sad about the plot twist, right? Or frustrated about the bad character doing the bad stuff, right? Or laughing, watching a comedian, whatever, right? So all of this on the screen, you're experiencing different emotions. The emotions you felt before, however, are not discharged. Those are still not processed in your body. So what you're doing is you're stacking current emotions on top of previous emotions. And when that happens and your brain is on pause, it's very, very important to notice that you are teaching your child to stuff their emotions. And this can be really hard news to chew, right? Because sometimes as parents, as I mentioned before, there's no judgment. We want that break from our kids. We want them to chill out immediately, right? And the screen can be quite a tempting opportunity to do that. It might even get us connection time, or a felt sense of connection, in the sense that your kiddo, who you really know needs a snuggle with you, won't take a hug. And then you throw on a YouTube video to see if they'll crawl into your lap, right? And it's really, really hard to turn off that pattern. And I do encourage you to do that, even though it's hard, for multiple reasons, but we'll talk about that in a moment. The first reason that we're talking about right now is the fact that your brain is actually distracted, and highly sensitive kids, highly sensitive people, use more of their mirror neurons. Now, what are mirror neurons? Those are parts of the brain that mimic the emotions and the experiences of another person. So they are paramount, super important in helping people experience empathy, right? And so when you're highly sensitive, you use more of your mirror neurons, you notice the emotions of somebody else, and that your brain information mirrors that back to you. And so you tap into your experiences that might be relevant to what you're witnessing somebody else feel. And you tap into your emotions related to what you might be witnessing somebody else feel. And so as a result, that takes a lot of brain energy, takes a lot of body energy to feel those feelings. And so it is a proven fact that if you are experiencing that emotion, you're not able to be present with the prior emotion. So it is a distraction, which in parenting for young, very, very young babies, right? Hey, look over here. Let me give you a snuggle. That might have worked very easily. And so you might be trained yourself to see that there might be some justification to distract your kid out of their emotional state. And then the screen can be quite convenient for that. So when we think about being able to support your child to regulate themselves, that's what's necessary, right? Because we all know as parents, screens are not readily available, even in a pandemic. When we're virtual schooling, or that's the only option you have, or the best option, either one, right? Screens were heavily readily available, and depending on where you live, might still very well be the primary means of education for your kid and or teenager at this point. And it's also true that when we're talking about regulating emotion, this is a completely different picture on whether or not your kids should be using their screens at that point. So it's really, really important that we're having this conversation today, because to assess whether or not your child is engaging in too much screen time, you want to look at the purpose of what they're using the screens for. And when we look at highly sensitive kids and supporting you and noticing that using screens is creating a bigger problem, it's really critical that we dive into this topic. So go back to the brain science, right? So we've got mirror neurons, and they are copying the emotion of what you witness. Now, whether or not you're feeling that emotion or you're just relating to it is personal experience. That's the difference between being empathic or just having empathy. And relating is having empathy. Being empathic is feeling the feeling of somebody else. When somebody else is feeling that feeling, it calling forth your relation to that feeling, and then you're actually feeling that feeling. Some people are empathic and highly sensitive, and other people are highly sensitive and relate, and then that makes them want to act on that empathy, or they're overwhelmed by that empathy. And I've spoken about empathy in different topics on my channel before, so you can look up the topic of empathy. You can look up the topic of wondering whether or not your kid's a sociopath. I've had much content on either topic. If you're listening and you're just catching my channel here. So when we think about right now, right, mirror neurons being tapped in, your child is tapping into the story, and sensitive children especially, but children in general, when they are in that moment, they are in that moment. They are feeling as if the screen is alive. They are living in that TV show. Now, whether your child is literal or not, and they know it's pretend, that's not what I'm talking about. So don't go down that perspective. What we're talking about is emotionally and full focused attention is sending the message to your child's brain that they are in the story, because they are processing deeply all of the details of that story, not to mention the fact that screens, especially cartoons, have a ton of bright lights, right? We've got a sensitive kid, sensitive to sensory stimuli, sensory information like bright lights and moving parts. And, my child is young, so she's into Magic School Bus sometimes, and comparing the new version of Magic School Bus to the old version of Magic School Bus. If you have Netflix, the the speed of the cartoons is completely different these days, right? Compared to when we were little. And it's really, really important to take that stuff into context, in addition to the fact that we have better research now. So of course, we're going to learn to do better and parent better than we were parented, or parent better than our personal experiences, just by nature of understanding the brain more, understanding how emotions are experienced more. Because if you're dealing with daily meltdowns right now, of course you want out of it, right? Of course you want your child or your teen to stop shutting down, stop breaking out of their big emotions, to, and hyper focusing on what they want in that moment, whether or not it's good for them. And for you at this point, it's really important to anchor into the understanding that when your child is watching the screen, their brain is not connected to anything else in reality. And to include their previous emotions, the emotions they experienced, what they were upset about before when they were having their meltdown, or when they were overwhelmed and you saw the meltdown about to happen, right? So you got to teach yourself, and then if you've got a co-parent who has this perspective, make sure that you guys are listening to this. This is not a debate. This is science. This is not something that you can disprove. Okay, so this is not an opinion. There's countless research articles and countless research perspectives to understand that when you're using a screen, your brain is impacted by it, and that's not something that you can just say. Not me, I'm unique, right? Like that, that's an opinion, not a fact. So when we look at the facts of how the brain is understood, and hooking kids and parents, adults onto brain scans, and understanding how sensitive kids' brains work, and how children's brains work in the research around screen time and how it impacts the brain, then we take those two pieces of research together, and we understand more about how it impacts your children. And so when you're noticing that the screen is a checkout point, right, then it's really important to understand that what you're looking for when your child is dealing with that big emotion, your teen wants to just peace out and get out of there, they need to be regulating their emotion, right? They need to be able to slow down the feeling, take it down a notch or 10, right? Notice what's bothering them, and then solve the problem, right? And you can't do that if you're not present in the moment. So what happens is the regulation gets put on pause, and your child is just moving on to another emotion. It's the same thing as if you were telling your kid to just suck it up and block it out. And that is really, really important that we understand, because when you're teaching your child to block out their emotions, you're not teaching them to regulate their emotions. Those two things can't go hand in hand. And I want to just make sure that we're clear on that, because when you might see other parents, right? You might have peers, your friends who use the screens at dinner time when you're out to eat together, or you might be going to a picnic and a fair, and they hand their kiddo a screen while you're in transit, or you might notice that when you send your son to so-and-so's house, little Johnny comes back with a history of just playing on video games all day, and so different parents in your neighborhood, in your friendship circle, might have a different opinion that isn't based in fact, that screens aren't that big of a deal. Or they might have a different need or different expectations for their child's needs, or expectations for what their child needs. And that is important to notice how that impacts your child, your sensitive child that you are raising, and make the decision to parent your child in a way that supports their emotional development, right? And so when you're setting limits around making these big screen time meltdowns to stop, and you're shifting how much time your child should have access to the screens. It's really important to not use the status quo opinions to change your child's behavior, because even the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends about an hour a day for children for screen time. Now, if your kid's in school, whether it's virtual schooling or not, they probably only have, if they're in an activity or not, 3-4 max hours a day out of school, right? And then you add dinner and you add commute, you add transit from here and there, and picking them up from school or whatever, playing outside maybe with their friends for a little while if that's possible. And then you put in an hour of screen time, then where's the family connection, right? It happens at dinner when your sensitive child might be at their most vulnerable point, right? Especially if they're a picky eater. And so then we want to look at understanding that the status quo for the typical child, in my opinion, professionally and personally, it is way too much. No child needs an hour a day of screen time. And it's also true that when the American Academy of Pediatrics sets those limits, they're setting them so that parents who are going to the extreme of using 4, 5, 6 hours a day of screen time have a baseline, right? Oh, okay, the doctors recommend an hour, and I'm doing 5, so like let's try and see if we can get closer to like 3, right? So it's really, really important that you're not parenting your sensitive child, who is in the data shows 15 to 20% of the population. You're using that understanding that your child is a minority in terms of their personality, and you're not governing them based on the majority rules or the majority approaches, because you can't fit a square peg in a round hole. You need to find how to set the round hole up for the round hole, for the round pegs, and then find the square holes for your square child. And that's really, really important. So, I say to my clients, pink permission slip to change the rules, right? And we want to do that in a way that supports you, but also in a way that helps you understand why it's so important, right? So we know that regulation requires presence of mind. You need to be able to notice your own emotions in order to change how you feel about something, and in order to solve a problem. Creativity does not happen when you are frustrated. And so when we think about that, right, that's important to be clear about. It's very, very difficult to think outside the box when you're aggravated, right? We know this as adults. So then how are we expecting our kids to do that? We need to be able to teach them how to regulate their emotions so that they can creatively solve problems. This is not just something you can talk to your kid about or just throw ideas at them, right? It's akin to asking your kid to hold their breath when they're hyperventilating. Like, that's, training how to breathe properly later makes sense, right? But in that moment, they're hyperventilating, holding their breath, they can't catch their breath. Those two things aren't working. So teaching use of screen time to chill out is counterproductive. And it's really important to notice that, because you're teaching your child to hold their breath when they're on the cusp, or they are actually hyperventilating. Whether that's a symptom of your child's meltdown, if your child does hyperventilate when they're having the meltdown, or if they're breathing heavy and you see that in the middle of their screams, which could lead to hyperventilation. It just depends on if your child is an anxious child when they melt down, or if your child gets angry and aggressive. Either way, it's the same problem, the same need that we need to make sure we support you in figuring out. Your child needs to be able to regulate their emotions. And how do we do that, right? You need to be able to do that through your relationship with them. You cannot teach through the barrier of a screen, if the barrier of the screen is leading to a show or a game, right? I mean, there's games out there that are falsely connected um, to telling parents that you, and they're um, playing into the consumerism around screens, that screen time, a video game, can help your child change how they experience their own emotions, right? And that's, it's really, really important that you don't fall down that rabbit hole, because those they're touting themselves as tools, right? But if you don't know how to regulate without the tool, then are you really learning how to regulate? So I want to make sure that we're understanding that screen time is not a tool to create coping. It can be when you're working through a screen through video chat, right? I mean, we've all done some virtual communication and virtual learning in our adult life. You're learning from this video if you're watching it on video. So the screen itself isn't the problem, it's the medium, right? Because my private practice, our clinicians, we use virtual therapy in the pandemic, and then the whole, our whole coaching company is 100% online, has been, and always will be, for the core of our work. And so that's not what I'm talking about. You can have a conversation through technology and solve the problem. And that's because relationships teach skills. And the core important piece that you need to be very solid in as a parent of a highly sensitive child is that your relationship with your child is the imperative catalyst to solve the problem of your child's emotional dysregulation. When your child is overwhelmed, your relationship with them is what helps them regulate. It is not a tool, a skill, a coping skill, a strategy, or a screen that is going to help your child learn how to regulate long term. Now, you might see some short-term success by teaching deep breathing, or some short-term success by throwing out their favorite YouTube show and having them take some breaks. But the actual skill of learning how to recognize emotions and dissipate them, make them evaporate in that moment, is something that needs to be taught through you, in communication with you, and through some pretty strategic steps that need to happen in a certain order. And so otherwise you're in the same pattern you're in, that you've been in other avenues, right? When a screen's not available, you usually feel like you're throwing things at the wall to see what sticks too, right? So you're perpetuating the same problem when you're using the screens. So your relationship with your child is so important. How you see your child's capacity to change, how you see your capacity to change, is super important. Because when we take our clients, for example, we have several, but one of the things that we've been doing this for so long, working with hundreds of families at this point, is noticing how swiftly you as a parent can change how you show up in the world, how you see challenges, and then totally be a completely different person 8 weeks from having, from doing intensive work, right? Our parenting program for parents of sensitive kids is called boot camp. It's not easy, nor is it like a 1 hour a week commitment, right? So and with that being said, when you're talking about creating rapid transformation for children and parents alike, and noticing this is a family dynamic issue, not a your child is a problem child issue, then everybody takes responsibility. In order to do that, you need to have some pretty well-rounded levels of support, because you're handling the dynamic of an entire family. And as a parent, you're doing that anyways, right? So it's not that it's hard in a way that dealing with meltdowns isn't hard, right? You have to pick your hard. You have to choose to change how you show up, how you talk to your kid, how you see the world, how you handle challenges, in order to see your child change their lives and change how they experience the world. And that is just as hard as trying to escape emotions and deal with the meltdown cycle day in and day out, day in and day out, right? So you're picking which one you want to focus on when you're seeing that this change might not be possible for you. And I want to really make sure that we're clear on that. This is part of the human condition, right? Change is hard, but so is living in this suffering, right? So is living in this challenge. And when you go through day in, day out, trying to solve the problem, by trying to find the next best thing to solve this issue, or by even just being in survival mode and going day by day and grabbing the screen without even really thinking about it. And then when you pull it out, you're like, oh snap, like I can't take it back, because your kids saw it, right? And that would be a bigger meltdown. And then it can really put you in quite a pickle and quite a cycle, right? And so in order to break out of a cycle, you need strategic steps. One of the pieces to the puzzle is taking a very clear look on how you're creating part of the problem. And that has to be done with support, because otherwise you're going to judge yourself for it and feel like a shitty parent. Pardon my French. And so, of course, we don't want that either, right? We want you to be able to move out of that emotion yourself too. And you need support to do that. And this is why we support parents who are a good fit in our program, because the level of frustration and aggravation and guilt and resentment that you're carrying for who knows how many years you've been dealing with this meltdown cycle is heavy, heavy stuff. And in order to support your child in breaking out of that pattern, you need to break out of that pattern first. And you need to remove that intensity first. That's just a piece, right? This isn't like just hoping that your kid's going to be okay if you stop using the screens. This is about some deep-seated work, and that's why the work that, when you do it well, when you address and you provide world-class mindset support and you provide world-class parenting support, and you do that in a constant, nearly 24/7 availability timeline, right? Our clients have access to our coaches 6 days a week, any time of the day, and we support them at any point. That's what's necessary, right? And so it's slogging work and very easy to backslide when you have to wait 7 days to get an answer out of your questions. And so it's very easy to stay in your own patterns too if you're not seeing that constant support and constant feedback from how you're changing things. Because when you change a personality trait, which is what we do, we help parents of highly sensitive kids notice and then see the outcome of the fact that being highly sensitive does not go hand in hand with having daily meltdowns. You're literally noticing before your eyes that your child is showing up as a different child. We want to take one of our clients, for example, Ryan, who showed us that and when she started, she was naming her that life was going to be terrible. She was planning for the worst every day, expecting the worst every day. And then she just celebrated on our last call, 10 weeks from when she starts. Curriculum's 8 weeks. Parents get support from us for 10. And from that initial part of our work together, Now she has not just hope, but she thinks about hope first. She sees problems as creatively solvable. She's capable of being able to do that. And that's not something that you can just flip a switch about. That is a trained skill you need to train yourself on. You run a marathon when you change this dynamic for your household, because in order to show your child that that's possible, you need to create rapid transformation for yourself and then lead your child into that perspective. And so when you completely change your child's presentation, right, we're talking about changing the personality trait. What we're doing is being able to notice that your child isn't going to stop being highly sensitive, but your child is going to be able to manage their emotions. And they're going to show up as their true selves, not their lost, stuck, frustrated selves. That's the piece that feels like such a big loss for you as a parent, right? Because you know that's not really who your kiddo is or what your child can be. What you're seeing here with those daily meltdowns is not what needs to continue. Okay. And so I want to encourage you, if you're stuck and you've been trying to turn this around, to book a call with our team. You don't need to keep living in this level of suffering. There's several consistent and strategic steps that we can take to turn this around very, very swiftly. And so if you're a parent of a child, go to meganthompsoncoaching.com/talk. Parents of a teen, go to meganthompsoncoaching.com/teen talk. And on that conversation, we're going to have a clear picture of where you're stuck, right? Because if using screens is just one piece of the puzzle, we need to look at all of the other pieces of the puzzle to understand whether or not we can help you eliminate that meltdown cycle, and do it in a way that will be consistent for your family. Do it in a way that's a good match for what your child needs and what your family needs. And that has to be created in a conversation. Trust can be built in one conversation. And when you have that conversation with us, you can observe what's available for you and what your child is capable of. And when you do that, we will understand what your next steps are. And whether that's working with us, we have to have a conversation about it. And if it's not, then we'll point you in the direction of what you need to do instead. So whether that be finding a more appropriate fit or working on changing something as small as your screen time limits in your home. Now, of course, daily meltdowns, if that's the case, we want to make sure that there's nothing else underlying the issue, because it can't just be as simple as changing the screen time limits for all children struggling in this way, right? So we want to have that conversation and give you the opportunity to notice how you can make this much more simple, rather than focusing on trying to solve tiny pieces of the puzzle every other day or every month, if you will. And that whack-a-mole process makes it way more complicated than it needs to be. So it can take hard work, but we can make it easy for you. We can make it simple. Go ahead, meganthompsoncoaching.com/talk or meganthompsoncoaching.com/teen talk to book a call with our team and decide how to solve this problem swiftly. All right, we'll talk to you soon.